Back to politics and what has been announced in the lead up to the budget. We have several leaks now from the coalition, and it is all in the defence and security space. Joining me now is political strategist Yaron Finkelstein, who served as advisor to Scott Morrison during his prime ministership. Yaron, great to see you. I want to start on this citizenship issue because it's something Peter Dutton has been really strong on. Does it translate to votes?
Well, it's on the specifics, it's not necessarily something that the Australian Jewish community has expressly asked for, but he is onto something, Laura, because we have seen in polling year after year that Australians do broadly like to feel that new migrants share or will accept some shared values that we think are, norms. And so he's definitely onto a winner there. To what extent and the detail, I'm sure that'll all come through. But yes, Australians do like to think that when you come here, you leave your baggage behind, no pun intended, but you do come here wanting a new start and to accept what we would describe as Australian values.
What should the strategy be at this point for the coalition and Peter Dutton? We know there's going to be a budget. I would say it's more likely than not that Anthony Albanese then follows in the next 4 or 5 days after a budget and calls an election for May 3. He could wait another week and go May 10 or even May 17, of course. But when you're the coalition, you don't have control over the election being called. How do you time your announcements, given, half the country do vote before election day these days?
They do. So the week and 2 weeks before actual polling day now constitutes almost 50% of the votes cast. So as we've discussed before, the calibration of your announcements really matters these days. But on to your bigger question about what they should be talking about. Look, they're putting things out there. The defence spending is one of them, and that doesn't necessarily capture new votes, but it certainly affirms those votes. Australians who think, well, yeah, it is a fairly uncertain world and we do need to make sure that we're ready for whatever comes. And remember, the numbers are hard for people to appreciate when you're talking about 2.5% of GDP or versions of that. They don't necessarily grapple with what that is as a specific number, but they do think that we need to be able to take care of ourselves. So the big question is, it's probably time to start talking about the economy. The government will certainly have that platform next week with the budget. They'll try to dominate the media with commentary and narratives about their handling of the economy, successfully or otherwise, is a matter for voters. But that's probably where the coalition also needs to head to, and you will hear more from them. They obviously have an opportunity with the leader of the opposition's budget and reply speech to start getting back to those core issues that are at the heart of a voter's agenda, which is what are you doing about cost of living and how are we fixing the economy and getting Australia back to where we were.
I do prescribe to this idea that oppositions don't necessarily win elections, but governments certainly do lose them. What do you think the biggest weak spot is for Anthony Albanese at the moment? There is this narrative that he does look like a weak leader. I think the energy debate is just such a weak spot for him. Chris Bowen standing up last week saying, OK, yep, we're going to see a 9% increase in New South Wales on your power bills. Couldn't quite admit to the Australian public that they've dismally failed on that $275 promise, and still saying renewables are the most cheap and reliable energy we have. I mean, surely people at home scratching their head going, really? Where's the evidence?
Well, that's exactly right. And their way of thinking about it is quite simple. They'll keep getting that household energy bill and they don't see reductions. And they're smart enough to work out that if businesses are getting those same increases, the goods and services that those businesses are selling to them will not lower in price. They actually get it faster than the government sometimes does. They see prices at the supermarkets not changing. Remember, it's one thing to stop the rate of increase. It's another for voters to think the prices are actually falling, and they don't feel that at the moment. So it's almost like a two-speed narrative. It's what the government is trying to tell voters is happening and what voters believe is really happening in their lives. So that's the clash. It's almost asymmetrical, and it's a real challenge for the government as they try and persuade people that they have the answers in next week's budget, which is precisely what I imagine they'll try and do. And to your point about election timing, that would make sense. Spend a few days talking about the economy on your terms, what you're doing to help people, and then probably call an election once you've sort of tweaked the perception that they're on to fixing the problem.
Well, they get to remind people that they're actually in charge and governing. They've just got to take advantage of that. I guess the risk for Anthony Albanese is it becomes a Jim Chalmers show, and whether that contrast starts to be made between the Treasurer and the Prime Minister. But if you're trying to win an election, surely it doesn't matter all that much. I know you, like me, watch American politics very closely. Yaron, you've been over there just recently. And Donald Trump continues to what Bannon described as or made up, and that is flood the zone with announcement after announcement. And he does seem to be making progress and momentum. I don't want to talk about Trumpian politics in Australia per se, but do you think that kind of flood the zone strategy might work, where you are making an announcement, you have big ideas, you're not really that strong on detail, but you know, you believe that, well, essentially Trump believes what he says and believes he can make it happen, even if he doesn't, you know, dot every I and cross every T along the way. Could that work, that kind of strategy work here, do you think?
It's a really good question. It works for him because it's part of his persona, and the voters who re-elected him knew that that's what they were going to get. They weren't getting the I crosser and the dot man. They were getting a guy who does sort of storm through issues, but the key is results. That's all that matters. If he achieves them at the end of the storm, then he wins that particular debate. If he doesn't, then he slides further in polling numbers, and that will be of concern. But results is the only thing that'll matter. So can it work in Australia? Well, what we do know from voters is that they are looking for leadership, people to get things done and to act in their interests. So if you are doing that, yes, it absolutely would be well considered. But there is one other thing, and that is there is a point where too much politics is too much politics for average voters. And one thing that I heard loud and clear from many of Trump observers in the United States, even amongst people who do his polling and things like that, is that there is a point where voters don't want to wake up every morning with more politics. They do want to get on with their version of their lives. And so he's got to get the balance right. Yes, lots of activity, but he needs to deliver results, and then they'll be happy.
Yaron, great to talk to you. I hope you enjoyed that Sydney sunrise this morning.